Hello everybody, my name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today we're going to be discussing the International House of Prayers report on Mike Bickle. Mike Bickle's been found guilty in official terms by the IHOP organization, or the bad IHOP as we like to call them. It's worth noting that Mike Bickle and IHOP are the quintessential manifestations of the New Apostolic Reformation heresy, which is a hyper-charismatic heretical movement. And that's kind of what IHOP represents. There's a lot more content on that than we're going to cover in this video, but needless to say, I'm not overly sympathetic towards IHOP as an organization, and I'm also not very sympathetic towards the Me Too movement, which is really what's represented in these allegations against Mike Bickle. It's kind of an interesting face-off between two distinctly non-Christian things and forces that are going to affect the church at large, because they're reusing the same tactics that they've used elsewhere in the church, such as the Southern Baptist Convention. So we're going to talk about this report that came out. Is it really all that significant? And I would say the answer is no. It's more notable what's not in the report than what's actually in the report. But we're going to talk about it nonetheless. And how should a Christian respond to the Mike Bickle report? So that's really what we're going to focus on, is a Christian response to that. But first, I want to let you know Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. So we're covering this story because, we reported on it when it first happened, provided some updates along the way. But it's been a while since we talked about this story, so we're going to talk about it, hopefully for the last time, right here. So you can follow us for stories like this and more over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. We have a free newsletter. We have a Patreon-like system, but the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, or podcast if you are new. So we're going to talk about a Bible verse for a second, because this is really what is going on here. Paul told Timothy what was going to happen, because this is what always happens. 2 Timothy 3:6 is talking about false teachers in the church, infiltrating the church, and wreaking havoc in the church. And Paul writes, "For among them are those who enter into households and captivate weak women weighed down with sins, led on by various impulses, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth." So that's verses 6 and 7. And it's talking about false teachers being sexual degenerates. They're preying on women. And obviously there's a way that can be sexual, and that's kind of the case going on with Mike Bickle. And there's also a lot of wolves out there who build entire audiences primarily of women. Think about Mike Todd at Transformation Church in Oklahoma. That's a clear example. I would say Levi Lusko is another example of someone who captivates women. So a lot of false teachers out there that really know how to hone in on weak women. That's, again, Paul was telling it like it was, and still is in 2 Timothy. So Mike Bickle is just more of the same of this. So here's the report itself. Again, I don't think the report's all that interesting because there's so much left out. There's a lot of things that are in social media posts and, prima facie evidence that is not really included. This report mostly focuses on interviews, witness interviews, and as many witness interviews as it could get. So that's primarily the gist of this report, is a summary of who was willing to talk to the gay lawyer that the bad IHOP hired. That's mostly what the scope of this report was. And even with that, they still found credible evidence that Mike Bickle was guilty of sexual misconduct. So I do want to say, because I brought the gay lawyer thing, that hiring an outside law firm to investigate matters within the church is a 1 Corinthians 6 violation, because you are using secular systems, secular entities, and again, these were not Christian lawyers, these are gay lawyers, to judge within the church. This is clearly against what Paul was teaching in 1 Corinthians 6, that the church should judge within the church. It's clearly what Paul teaches, and not using the courts to judge within the church. So that's what Paul taught. That's what 1 Corinthians 6 teaches us. Yet everyone seems to forget or not apply it in that way. They think it's only about believers suing other believers, but no, you're missing the spirit of what Paul is really talking about. He's talking about the church's jurisdiction to judge matters within the church. So a lot of it focuses on, the quirkiness of Mike Bickle, which is frankly not necessary to really include in the conclusions. And then there's a part about Mike Bickle admitting to inappropriate contact in which she was touching me, but I was not touching her. That's the gist of what this report finds. And there's also some behavior in which Mike Bickle was basically trying to protect his reputation and the steps that he took to do that. This is an interesting one, whereas a witness reported that a former senior leader said words to the effect that he didn't want to be on Mike Bickle's bad side. The context of this comment related to knowledge that Mike Bickle's son was having a relationship outside of his marriage while the woman was in some stage of separation from her ex-husband. So obviously Mike Bickle didn't want to talk about that, and that was, part of how he was misusing his power. And then the big line down here is based on the credible evidence, including his own acknowledgments of contact with two Jane Does over 20 years ago. It is more likely than not that Mike Bickle engaged in inappropriate behavior, including sexual conduct and clergy misconduct, and an abuse of power for a person in a position of trust and leadership. As previously stated, after these allegations emerged in December 2023, IHOP announced it was immediately, formally, and permanently separating from Mike Bickle. So there's a couple things included in that. Here's what's not included in that, and I'll reference the Christian Post and their reporting on this, was that, there's a quote about based on credible evidence that I just read, but there's also something that wasn't brought up. While McNamara, who's the gay-affirming lawyer that IHOP hired, the bad IHOP, did not interview Bickle for the report, she noted that he responded to questions via his attorney. And in his response to her, he confessed to consensual sexual contact. Again, that's bad enough. Mike Bickle also did that. Then there's a part about last December. So he already confessed to some bad stuff. He did confess to some bad stuff back in December. Bickle's confession came after a woman identified as Jane Doe by the Roy's report, which is a very not credible outlet, by the way, alleged for the approximately 3 years from 1996 to 1999, before he founded IHOP, Bickle paid for her apartment, gave her a key to his office, and engaged in every sexual act with her except copulation. Because that was apparently the line when, you sell out for money. Because this person's... I'll get to my commentary in a second. She said that the IHOP founder wooed her with scripture when she was just 19 and he was 42, then made her a kept woman for several years as he established his now popular ministry. So that was probably the most salacious allegation against Mike Bickle. And what is that allegation really? It's that, to use, mafia terms, Mike Bickle had a gumar. He had a whore. And that's a whore right there, because he's paying for an apartment, so she's getting money for all these sexual acts with him. Like, she's not a victim, she's a whore. She's a paramour. Or if you want to be classy about it, she's a gumar. But she's not a victim. That's basically, as a Christian, you can't really believe that that's a victim. That's a whore. There's a difference. She was getting paid. And yet we're supposed to treat these women as victims. And the fact of the matter is they're weak women. Just like Paul wrote. So Mike Bickle's a dirtbag, but we already knew he was a false teacher before all this started. This is just him doing exactly what Paul said false teachers do. And as a Christian, this is an unsurprising development for Mike Bickle, for the bad IHOP, because a lot of hyper-charismatic preachers have issues and scandals, extramarital affairs, you name it. So that's kind of really where we're at. Nothing in this should be surprising. The report didn't talk about a whole lot, left out a lot more than it covered. But in their defense, these people weren't willing to talk to them. They wanted their own gay law firm to investigate, and instead of just, talking to who the bad IHOP wanted to hire. They wanted bad IHOP to be dumb like the Southern Baptist Convention in this. And the Southern Baptist Convention, they wasted millions of dollars hiring Guidepost Solutions to publish a report of what was almost exclusively public domain. So they wasted all that money, found nothing relating to the scope of the investigation in the first place, and invited several lawsuits on them. But at the end of the day, you don't need to go through this process at all. There's no biblical requirement to hire a law firm to investigate something, especially when you've already fired and terminated the teacher who was in sexual sin. They already fired Mike Bickle. They don't really need to do an exhaustive autopsy on what he did and did not do. They found that he did enough and that they parted ways with him. I don't blame them for firing Mike Bickle before the investigation was concluded. And since the investigation concluded with enough knowledge to justify the termination, they didn't need to go all out and all in depth to exhaustively uncover what he did or did not do. That's a waste of time. That's a waste of money. And nothing that he is alleged to have done was illegal. So there's no reason for it. And if anything was illegal, it should be investigated by the police, because that's their jurisdiction, not the church's jurisdiction. So there's a lot of, jurisdictional errors in these types of matters. If it's a crime, it should be referred to the police, bar none. So that's kind of my take on, this violates 1 Corinthians 6. And IHOP, they want to be done with Mike Bickle. This report was rushed, but I don't blame them for rushing it, because first of all, why pay the lawyers more money? They're the only ones benefiting from this. 2, rip the Band-Aid off and get it over with. Be done with it. Don't drag on this process. This is just wisdom here. You don't drag on this process. You act swiftly, you be done. They've already fired Mike Bickle. They fired a lot of people. A lot of people have left. Now, again, I don't wish IHOP any luck unless they repent of their heresies. But I don't blame them for being more prudent than the Southern Baptist Convention, than some other organizations, and not hiring Guidepost to do a bad job and take much more money from them. I don't blame them for not being as dumb as they could have been. So that's my take on this. Again, Mike Bickle was a bad dude, but we didn't need a massive report to tell us that. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that for now. My name's Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like this content, subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, we will catch you on the next one.